Hello everybody, and thank you for joining us for another episode of Thrill Source. In this update today, we're going to be providing an update on the contract that's been signed between Westchester County and Standard Amusements to operate Playland Park in Rye, New York. Now, we did a previous video on Playland as a little bit of a background on the park, and we'll provide that link in the description. So please feel free to take a look at that video if you don't know very much about the park or aren't local in Westchester County. But basically, Playland is the only amusement park in the United States that is both owned and operated by a government. Westchester County is the government that owns and operates Playland, and they've actually operated it since 1928 when the park opened. Playland's a very historic park. It's actually a National Historic Landmark. The only other park being a National Historic Landmark is Kennywood in Pennsylvania. And Playland also features 7 original rides still from 1928. So it's not just a cookie-cutter amusement park. It's along the Long Island Sound, Art Deco themed, and very historic. So that adds to some of the expense in maintaining the park. But the park is currently, and has been for many years, being run by the Westchester County Parks Department. It's the same department that maintains baseball fields and all of the 50 parks across the Westchester County Park system. They also operate Playland. So the previous administration, County Executive Rob Astorino, who's no longer in office, he was a Republican who signed a contract with the private company Standard Amusements to operate the park for 15 years, starting in 2019, after this season in November, for 15 years, and then another option for a 15-year extension. And basically, Standard Amusements is operated by United Parks, which operates 2 water parks across the country. Now, there have been a few changes to the contract, and there also is a new government administration in with County Executive George Latimer, who has been reviewing the deal. Some of the concerns revolve around changes that have been made to the contract, such as the county's obligation of capital improvements in the deal, and the order of the money that has to be put up front. So in the deal, Standard Amusements is basically responsible for putting $25 million to $30 million into the park in capital investments, plus operating expenses, which will be taken off the shoulders of the county since they will be operating the park. In addition to that, there are a few upfront payments. I believe $2 million or so in the $2 million ballpark range was an upfront payment that had to be made from Standard Amusements to Westchester County. Now, part of the problem with that is the previous county administration kept extending the deadline for the payment to be made. So the current county executive is not happy about that deadline being extended and is accusing Standard Amusements of not living up to their end of the deal. On the other hand, the county is also responsible for putting $30 million into the park, since the county will still be owning the park and it still will be county parkland. Now, this $30 million is for capital improvements and infrastructure projects that should have been done years ago. So the county could basically be seen as a landlord who has to do infrastructure projects such as sewer projects, electrical, building maintenance. Some of the buildings have structural issues and they're historic buildings. So that's the $30 million coming from the county. The county's already completed several capital projects, including putting a new sewer line in and also a new switchgear building for the electrical system within the park. Part of the concern for the county is that the previous administration also changed the order in which the capital improvement had to be laid out. The county now is responsible for completing 50% of the capital projects they're responsible for, so $15 million, give or take, the county needs to spend before Standard Amusements needs to both make their payment and take over the park. So that's expected to be done by later this year, but nonetheless, the county isn't happy about that change being made by the previous county administration without the approval of the Board of Legislators. Now, from Standard Amusements' perspective, they're a private entity backed by a hedge fund, so they're wanting to make sure that the county is actually going to put money into the park as a landlord before they go and put their own money into the park. Now, some of the opponents to the deal say that the county doesn't get enough revenue coming from the park. They lose that revenue stream once Standard Amusements takes over. In addition, they get only, I believe, about a 10% cut of the profits, but that's only after Standard Amusements has recouped their initial investment, and that's in addition to the upfront payments that Standard Amusements has to make to the county. So the opponents to the deal take issue with the fact that if the park does do well going forward, the county is not going to get much of a return on their investment for the capital projects that they're putting into the park. Now, in some cases, this could be seen as a valid opinion. However, you need to look at the facts and the numbers. The county has been running Playland since 1928. Now, there have been a few changes over the years. However, for the past about 15-20 years, it's been run by the county parks department. And Playland's budget is actually put into the general parks department budget. So Playland has a very set operating budget, and there's not a lot of leeway there. In addition to that, things typically cost more money when they're run by a government. Not a lot of people will object to that opinion. If you look at the facts, such as employee wages, union workers, things are a lot more expensive than they likely would be at, say, a private individual park. Now, back in the 1980s, Playland was leased out to a private company for 2 years, which was the Marriott Corporation, actually. And they ran the park for 2 years, but they had a lot of problems. They did not turn a profit, and they actually lost several $1 million. So the county and Marriott ended up mutually ending the deal after 2 years, and that's when the the Westchester County Parks Department took over the park. Previously to that, it was run by the Playland Commission, who oversaw the park, and that still was a government entity, but it was separate from the county parks department. In addition to that, any money that the park takes in, any revenue from the park that comes in, goes directly into the county's general fund. So even if the park has a great year and turns a profit, none of that money is going back into the park. It's all going back into Westchester County's reserves. And likely, year after year, Playland's getting a very similar looking operating budget. There's actually not a year on record that Playland has turned a profit. There have been years that the park has broken even, but on average, the park loses between $3 and $5 million a year. And that's for a variety of reasons. One of the reasons is also the county debt service that they have on the park. So there are some years that the park, if you take out the debt service, will break even, but still, that's a very big loss for the county. And the argument from those in favor of the Standard Amusements contract, from a political and budgeting perspective, is that it's the only government-run amusement park in the country, and there's a reason for that. People will argue, including myself, that a county does not have any business running an amusement park. And it's not in the best interest of taxpayers, nor is it an essential government service. So there is solid reasoning behind why the county would not want to put a lot of money into the park. Now, there are people in favor of the county running it, so it remains to be seen what will happen. But part of the issue is also that, yes, the county has neglected the park for many years. Now, it's a safe park, the rides are safe, the park has a phenomenal maintenance staff, and it's still a beautiful park. But with it being a historic park, a lot of old buildings, the price tag that the county is putting on the park to get it back up to code, so to speak, is about $115 million. And that's a ton of money to put into a place that loses $3 to $5 million a year, especially if the county were the ones to be financing it. So that's the argument for both taking the operating expenses off the county's shoulders so you don't have that yearly loss at the park, and Standard Amusements would invest $30 million into new rides and attractions and new upgrades at the park, and they would operate it for, at a minimum, 15 years under the contract. And the county would also finish those capital projects that they've been finishing for or should have been finished years ago, excuse me. So that's a little bit of the background on the Playland situation. So where are we now? Recently in the news, Westchester County Executive George Latimer actually spoke out against Standard Amusements, saying that they're not living up to their end of the deal. And County Executive Latimer spoke about how a recent map that shows Standard Amusements' 10-year plan for the park was actually sent to a local newspaper before that plan was shared with either the county administration, the Parks Department, or the County Board of Legislators. County Executive Latimer has also addressed the concerns that I mentioned earlier regarding Standard not putting in their upfront investment of about $2 million yet, since the previous administration extended the contract. He's also of the belief that the county should be getting a larger cut of the profits, and they shouldn't have to wait until Standard has recouped their original investment. Now, there's certainly a possibility, and the county executive has discussed this, that if they cannot work out a deal, that this may go to court, and that is certainly not a good thing for Playland. It would probably definitely mean that Playland would continue to be operated by the county at least through 2020, should that happen. As of right now, Standard's scheduled to take over this November of 2019, but if it went to court, Standard definitely would not be taking over the park in 2020. And of course, it also jeopardizes whether that money gets put into the park. Now, as for the plan that I mentioned earlier with Standard Amusements, they released their 10-year plan, or a map showing some of the highlights of their 10-year plan for the park. And there was a very interesting development that hadn't been in their previous plans. If you know Playland, you know there's a Zamperla Volaire and the Music Express in the front end of the park along the parking lot. And that was actually along the midway there next to the colonnades, the original location of the airplane coaster, which was torn down in 1955, or the mid-50s. And at the time, that was considered to be one of the best coasters in the world. It was a wooden coaster. And there was the airplane coaster and the dragon coaster were both original to Playland. And the dragon coaster, which is now one of the main thrill rides at the park, was actually seen as a family version of the airplane coaster, since it's a little bit slower, doesn't have much airtime, and it's really more of a family wooden coaster, which still operates today. But the airplane coaster was seen as a really thrilling wooden coaster, bank turns, airtime. So there was actually a diagram on the map, and it just stated new roller coaster that replaced Superflight, and it looks like the Music Express, although it wasn't indicated whether the Music Express would be relocated. And if you compare that map to the diagram or the blueprints of the airplane coaster, it exactly matches the layout. So it looks like Standard Amusements may be trying to rebuild or at least use the same designs on a new wooden coaster for the airplane coaster, which is very exciting at a park like Playland that has so much history, and certainly very exciting that they want to put new rides into the park, considering the park hasn't seen a new ride since 2008, which actually was the Music Express, and the last coaster added being in 2004. Now, of course, this is all subject to the deal going through, and it's also a 10-year plan, so we don't really know when that new coaster would be built. It could be in year 1, it could be in year 10. I would say it's more likely to see that towards the back end of the deal as they work on other park improvements and smaller new flat rides going in the first couple of years. So just to recap, the contract with Standard Amusements is currently signed by the county, so as of now, they are scheduled to take over in November of 2019. However, like I mentioned, the county is disputing the deal, and they are aiming to renegotiate it with Standard. However, there are signs pointing that toward the county having issues renegotiating the deal, which could mean, and most likely means, if that is in fact the case, that the county and Standard Amusements will go to court, either in an effort to amend the deal if they can't agree on something before that, or for the county to get out of the deal and continue running Playland by itself. So we will certainly keep you updated. Let us know what you think, and please be sure to check out updates on our social media pages for Thrill Source, and also our previous Playland video, which describes a little bit about the park, and that link will be in the description. So thanks for joining us, and stay tuned.